I had been there for 9.5 years and feel extraordinarily proud of what I did.
Welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast. My name is Martin McGovern, and today we have another special guest for the Life After Layoff series. Shauna is joining us. Shauna Griffiths. I hope I'm saying all those right. And she's joining us. She is a marketing solutions, brand partnerships, executive coach with a focus on remote leadership. So Shauna, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to get into your story, and we like to kick these off by asking the tried and true interview question. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching you and just really am a fan of what you're doing. Helping people to, share their voices and their experiences, I think is so important, especially all we're facing right now. So I am in an interesting phase of my career after spending over 20 years working. I worked with brands, professional sports, entertainment, spent time on the agency side, working across verticals from brands, from startups to iconic brands. And I was laid off in the face of COVID in the beginning of April. So I am now a founder of a company called SLG Impact. And it's really about focusing on making positive impact on brands and people in their journey, because the two really are connected. And I think a lot of times the disconnect between brands, how they operate, the work, and the people ends up with a lot of pain points for people. So I'm doing my best to make the most of this opportunity.
I love it. And I really appreciate you coming in and chatting with us today and opening up about your experience, because I do think that it's something that, people go through pretty alone. There's not really a
Yeah.
whole lot of places to feel connected and feel like, you're not the only one going through it. Even if there's like a mass layoff, everyone's like in their own little pocket, And so tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get into the brand marketing and advertising spaces?
Yeah, it was funny. I played basketball at the University of Michigan in undergrad,
Nice.
and then I used my 5th year of eligibility to go to grad school, get my MBA, and run cross country. And the reason I tell that story is I was one of those people who needed a bit more time in life. I got through my undergrad and had a degree and had done well in school and had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with myself. And so it was really by following passion points that I found my way. I was always a basketball head, always a Nike junkie, and was able to literally bang on doors until someone could, and work relationships until someone gave me a shot. So I spent time in the beginning with Nike, placed with 2 different WNBA teams, fell absolutely in love with the NBA, WNBA family, and then that became my new focus, my new North Star. I was obsessed, had to get my way to the NBA world. And so I would take trips to New York City and go bang on doors at the NBA, trying to get one person to introduce me to the next person, and spent quite some time doing that. And was given an opportunity when the NBA started the NBDL, which is now the G League, which sometimes that makes me feel like a dinosaur. It doesn't even exist anymore. But so basically I spent 13 years in the NBA family. So from there, I again did the same kind of thing. I got obsessed. I had been in the minor league system for the NBA, and I was like, I am obsessed with wanting to work at the NBA level, at the highest level. So I literally sat there calling heads of marketing, and an awesome fellow U of M grad, Sid Levy, gave me a shot at the Nets. And then I've had amazing people share little nuggets along the way that they didn't really realize were going to be that impactful. And so I remember my boss, Matt Pizarris, when I was at the Nets, who's still an amazing friend of mine, shared a couple of things to me. One, he said to me, once you get out of the eye of the actual team, you realize that there's so much out there in the world. And that stuck with me. And the other thing that stuck with me was I was sitting in the marketing seat, and he explained to me the importance of having more tools in my toolbox, not just being the marketer who spends money, but the marketer who can actually drive revenue, who can create partnerships, through and create revenue through that. And so I really listened to those things. And then, so I tell that part because that was my pathway to wanting to get to the agency side, where I wanted to become the most valuable resource I could. And so to me, that meant evolving from just marketing to marketing and brand partnerships. That meant me getting outside of the eye of the needle of professional sports entertainment to touching brands. I've worked with brands from nonprofits to, to sports teams, to big regular, B2C brands. So that was really my why of why I went to the agency side. I figured it was the fastest way for me to get the most well-rounded experience possible.
I love that. And you really hit on a number of things that I'd love to go deeper into. One
Yeah,
is
please.
this banging on doors piece. I think a lot of people will say, like, you got to go and bang on doors, and they mean it figuratively, but it sounds like you were pretty literal with it. Like, what do you actually mean by that? Like, you were getting people's phone numbers. How did you get them?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what was that process like? Because I feel like some people are really scared to even send an email to someone, and you took it to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was that almost like unbridled passion that I had in wanting to be somewhere. And it kind of made me look past those fears of, am I going to be rejected? Is this too forward? And so, and again, one of my mentors along the way, Felicia Hall Allen, shared with me at the very, very beginning of my career about anytime you go to someone and you're trying to network, say you start with 10 people, if you're asking each one of them to open the door to at least one of their networks, it just starts to multiply. So I took that philosophy. And when I say bang on doors, again, you're right. It's a little bit just like in theory, right? Or just a phrase, but to some degree I was doing that. And sometimes that was, literally going to New York, going into the office, meeting with one person, and then physically asking them, like, looking around in the halls, or being proactive while I was there meeting to stop and introduce myself to someone else who was in the hall. But again, when you network with that one person, is to humbly yet boldly ask them to introduce you to that one next person. Again, that thing that she said to me, as it becomes this like spider web that can become exponential, but you have to be in the position of asking for it and then following through with it, going to that next person. And so that was my version of the literal and figurative banging on doors.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it always has been.
Absolutely. Well, and what you're hitting on is this idea of it's all upside. We had a conversation yesterday with someone who's in sales, and they were talking about how, they'll go on an interview, and partway through the interview, they might realize, like, oh, I'm actually not going to get this job.
Right.
But then they just switch over to, but I'm going to get this connection. And they because they're
Yes.
like, I'm in the sales world. This person's in the sales world. I'm staying
Right.
connected to this person I'm chatting with, regardless of what happens to the job. And to your
Yeah,
point, it's
exactly.
like, this person might not be able to hire you. This person might not be able to help you, but you want to
Mhm.
connect with everyone in the sports world. And that's a
Yeah.
massive driver. I love it. Um,
Yeah.
and then you also switched your focus there from a marketer who spends money, which
Yeah.
we've all met those marketers, if you've been in the marketing scene at all, and to the marketer who generates
Right.
money, who drives revenue. And that shift is something that I think is really great in the marketing world, but also just good for any job seeker to think about, which is what is the ROI of your role? So how was that shift for you, and what sort of is the way that you perceive the ROI of what you do these days?
Yeah, I think it's a good I guess segue. I think that when you are a marketer, a lot of times you're in the seat actually of facilitating the sale of something. So when I was sitting in the seat at, in an NBA team, I was really marketing the sale of a ticket. And most people didn't understand that, right? They thought, oh, it's so sexy and all this. And I'm like, okay, but what I do every single day is literally talk about like tickets that we need to sell. So I think that it is inherent in a role of a marketer to drive revenue by moving whatever the product is, the service that you're trying to sell, that from a transactional standpoint. But that shift in the mindset came also to how am I thinking in a creative way to create, like if it's a for the marketing platform, how can it truly be monetized? It can be monetized by selling the product or service. It can be monetized by it being a creative platform that another brand can get involved in, and that brand's going to spend dollars. So when I say, again, it is inherent in the role of a marketer to drive sales, but my shift was thinking, yeah, and I'm going to monetize it through the lens of a brand partner. And so that brand partner can either bring money to the table to, again, it's kind of like a sponsorship, or that brand partner can bring amplification to further drive sales. But that's something I think is going to be needed more and more. And that was the big shift for me, which was partly when the economy crashed, was around the time that he gave me that key nugget. And here we are again, in this world facing and basically economic explosion. And so, I think it's truly important to be providing value as you come forward and thinking about, similarly, how am I bringing an idea forward, solution forward, that a brand can monetize.
I love that. Yeah. Because I talk with a lot of designers and UX designers, and they're like, I just want to make their website more beautiful. And I'm like,
Right.
does that beautiful website convert? we
Exactly.
always have to come back to the conversion there.
It's so true.
And, I feel like it's very interesting. I haven't really talked to too many folks with your sort of sports background.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that athlete's mindset really
Yeah.
plays into having a healthy outlook on a career. I'm kind of curious, what parts of being an athlete do you think
Yeah.
helped you the most in your career up to this point?
It's a great question, and I truly love that athlete mindset. And it doesn't always have to come in an athlete. I think there's different markers that you can look for in someone. I remember relatively, well, not recently now, but maybe a year ago, I was interviewing people for a position, and this one guy, Micah, he was great. I looked at his resume and it said he was an Eagle Scout. And I was like, that has the mindset. And so, I think it's this work ethic. It is that gritty. And I think it is this always seeking to improve. And that's what I experienced. I always wanted to get myself to the next level. When I was a kid playing AAU, playing, getting to college, like it just, and then it kind of, that same mindset carried through in my career. When I was referencing earlier, I got really obsessive about these passion points of mine and wanting, so it's that constant drive to succeed and to constantly be challenging yourself. And some of that goes with, you have an understanding that you need to consistently practice, and that you don't get satisfied, right? I remember when I was young and I used to stand there and like shoot free throws forever at my driveway. And it was because it didn't matter how many I made. It was like, you always want to be practicing. You always want, so you always want to be game ready. And so actually in my language to this day, I still use a lot of these type of this type of language, these type of words, which can kind of be funny sometimes. Sometimes people think I'm being like, canned or cheesy. I'm like, no, this is actually how I talk. So, and I think there's also something to a sense of team and a sense that there's something bigger than just yourself. And so if I want to succeed at a job, it's not, or, a project or, anything I'm doing, it's not all about myself. It's about like, I want to do better, but I want to help my teammates. I don't want to be this lone shark. So, and then I think there's also something inherent in respecting someone who's in a leadership or coaching role ahead of you. And so, I'm always looking for who that person can be for me. And so I think, again, then you want to please that person, you want to perform. And so I think those are all kind of characteristics that you can mash up. And that is like the heart of an athlete, a warrior, a champion that I hold close to myself. And that's what I look for in other people.
I love that. There's so many pieces in there, that daily practice. That's something we preach here
Yeah.
a ton. It's not about getting one application in. It's about applying every day. It's not about networking with that one right person. It's about networking every day. It's not, yeah, and so on and so forth. And like you're always trying to be game ready. That's super cool. And that
Yeah.
idea of team, and also that idea of like mentorship, like look, you know how to be coached. Like that's such a great
Mm,
mindset to have. And an interesting thing about sports is like, teams gain players and lose players and people get cut and all those things
yeah.
happen. And it's not always personal. It's like just kind of how things go, and performance is tied to it, but sometimes it's not. And it's
Right.
so
Yeah.
interesting to see how that all plays together. So as we move forward in your story and we get closer
Hmm.
to, that infamous day of the layoff, right? What were you working on leading up to the time of that critical point in the story?
Yeah. Well, I had, in my time at the agency, I built the departments that were under me. And at the time that those were integrated marketing and brand partnerships. So I was leading that and had about 30-ish people in various locations in the US that I was leading remotely. And so we had various clients that fell under those two umbrellas. And then I had also spent a year as a managing director of the office that was in Indiana, that had about 20, 25 people. And that role was really focusing on integration. So the company had been through an acquisition and needed some help with integration, having different offices across the country with a parent company headquartered in the UK. So there was a lot of things that I was doing and focusing on. And it was interesting. Like I had quite a long title to kind of capture all those things, which is, kind of came the butt of jokes at times. But so I had a lot of things that I was working on, and really loved the connection with my staff. So that's what I was doing before
That's awesome.
the infamous day. Yeah.
And and that's where we are. So we're coming
Yeah.
up on the infamous day. So
Yeah.
did you have like any ideas that this was coming? Was it all COVID
Yeah.
related? What was the situation, and was it a surprise, or did it kind of
Not a
build?
surprise, not a surprise. And I think it's, we all have those senses, those instincts, and you're like, something's going on here. And I think I could see what was happening with the company in general. They had been a new president hired, and anytime a new president comes in, I think it's their job, to really look at making some changes. But then when you meet that with the huge wave of COVID, and the fact that the company is an experiential agency, and so when and very sport focused, so everybody in the world sees that COVID really hit, really impacted that sector, and so the company had to make some really big, wide sweeping changes, and I was a part of that. So and again, I think you can kind of see things, and there was things that I noticed. And so when I got the call, I wasn't surprised. The company had also shared some, that they were going to be making changes. There was some transparency there, as a blanket statement. And I'm never someone to think in my career like, oh, I'm safe. So I was always thinking, and I think anybody, that time change like that, if you're a senior person, there's some risk there. And I was the only senior person who worked remotely. As I said, I had worked remotely for 4.5 years. So, you just start to kind of look at some of the different risk factors. So I wasn't surprised per se.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting thing to keep in mind. I think, when folks are working at companies, they sometimes think, oh, well, you're senior, so you must be safe. But,
Yeah.
you're kind of pointing out, no, actually, senior leadership can be, one of the quickest things to shift and to move.
Yeah.
And I like that you've had that sort of mindset of, I never think I'm safe.
Yep.
And I think it's an important mindset to cultivate in a career. I think this old this old guard of like, stay at a company 50 years, get the watch kind of thing. That's even that phrase, which I heard 10 years ago, was already starting to feel pretty dated at the time. I don't even know anyone
Yes.
that has something like that these days. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how did you sort of fortify your life outside of work, to
Ah.
prepare yourself for that lack of safety?
I made a massive change in my life I was actually just talking about this earlier today, related to my priorities. And there's a couple of people who have said to me since I was laid off about like, well, I'm sure that your identity has been shaken. And I'm grateful that I went through a time earlier in my career journey where I had my own wake up call about my priorities being out of line, and that I identified so much. It was like I didn't have a personal identity. I would introduce myself as, I'm Shauna and I work for the Nets. And it was like, whoa, and I think I saw the impact of that in how I functioned. I worked all the time, almost 24/7. I didn't have, wasn't dating much at all, wasn't making room for those type of things. And so I made it was a very conscious decision. And, my husband is a wonderful example of balance that I was able to extract some of that from. And when we made the move from New York City to Colorado about 4.5 years ago, almost 5 years ago by now, it was again, how am I creating those those boundaries to be able to understand like where my identity lies and where the work lies. And so having to have little things in like shutting my computer at night and doing other things. And when you also live in an area like Colorado where I live, when you meet people, I'm Shauna and I ride bikes. I'm a mountain biker. It's not, this is a funny thing that made me really realize that we went on a mountain biking camping trip with 6 guys and my husband and I, 3 days, like eating, sleeping, riding together, all of this. I walked out of that 3 days and I had no idea what anybody did for work. And I thought it was the most amazing thing. So I had already gone through a lot of that in my journey. So when this happened, it was less about shaking my identity and more about like understanding that this compartment of my life was shifting. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect. I love that you shared that story of Colorado. Years ago, I did a road trip around the country with my podcast, old podcast that I'm not part of anymore. We noticed in each city, there was a different sort of like entrepreneurial spirit or work spirit.
Right.
Like Chicago is all about like work your ass off. Like we're hardworking, like it's snowing outside. There's a wind chill that's going to take your feet off and like, but we're working. And then like in California,
in shorts.
Yeah, exactly. And then in California, it's all about like fame and like, how do you get influence and like noticed and like the perception. And then we stopped in Colorado and it was like, no one talked about their job. Like no one, everyone's like, oh yeah, no, I love pot or I love hiking or I love like,
it's so true. I love that. It's so funny. Yeah.
It's like, I was like, wait, what do you do for a living? And they're like, oh, just like,
and people actually don't want to talk about it. They're just like, oh, if I have to, which actually can make it an interesting experience trying to network with people. Cause you're like, how do I get to a conversation about work and get this person to want to have a conversation about it?
So interesting.
So it's interesting you say that because I kind of call it a tour of duty. My career had me in Detroit, Seattle, North Carolina, New Jersey, New York, here. So you're so right. In different parts of the country, it's a completely different mindset, work style, even like how fast people talk. I went down to North Carolina in the beginning after having been geared up because I thought I was going to go, storm the doors and work at the NBA office. Right. And I got down to New York and they were like, whoa, you ain't from around here, are you? And I was like, no, I'm not. No. So,
that's how I felt in New York. I was like, everyone speaks a lot quicker here, huh?
Yeah,
exactly. Rush to get somewhere. Like, that's so cool. And now, like that I think is such an important point that you're making of like separating your identity from the job. And, that's a very European thing too. I find that people get insulted in other countries if you ask them what they do before you ask them about who they are. So it's very cool. And that is one of the toughest things about going through a layoff is a job gives you a reputation, which is the company's reputation, an identity, which is your job title, and security, which is your salary. And so, but a lot of people think, oh, I'm just losing my security. No, you're losing a lot of
A
stuff
lot.
if you've totally tied yourself in. So I love that you
Yeah.
know, how long ago was it that you started making that separation?
It's funny that you said European. My husband is British.
Oh,
And
cool.
so when I said about his influence on me, so I would say that it was probably right before I met him. Again, it was this very conscious shift that I needed to shift my life to make room for a relationship that I wanted so deeply. So I would say it was probably about 7.5 years ago where it was that conscious shift. But then I think, again, like, we just celebrated our fifth wedding anniversary, actually. So
Congrats.
I think, thank you. I think probably 6.5 years ago, when we were first together, was really where it was like, when you can see someone else doing it, it almost like puts a mirror up for you. So you can see your, like, whoa, the contrast of yourself. I was, this is actually kind of a funny story. When we were first together, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. As literally, I would get up and work at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he was still sleeping. And I lived in a studio apartment. So I went into the bathroom and shut the door and was sitting on the edge of the tub working on my computer. And like 4:30 or 5, he comes in to use the bathroom, and he looked at me and his eyes got so big. And I was like, that was my, like, smack me in the face, like, whoa, okay, I saw how out of whack my priorities were
Mm-hmm.
and how I was operating. And I was like, close the computer, go back to that. So, sometimes you just need these things to kind of, again, like, show you, because you're so close to it, you're living in it. It's the way you've functioned for whatever reasons. So yeah. So
I
that's
love
how long
that.
ago.
It's such an important thing for folks to think about. And I like that, you talked about the timeline too, because it's not an overnight thing. It's not easy to
No.
separate. And it can
Mm-mm.
kind of go back and forth, right? There might be times you're way more dedicated to work and times where you're not. And I think it's really good to, whatever your identity, you want it to be outside of work, to figure it out, to play around with it and explore. Um,
Yeah. And I think, let me say one thing on
yeah.
that. I think it's so important what you said about the ebb and flow of it, because there's been times during it where I'll catch myself starting to revert to old behaviors or thought patterns. And that's where, again, it's like whatever that mirror is or that thing to help keep your awareness heightened and to basically keep yourself in check, So I couldn't agree with you more about that nature of it being this ebb and flow that you got to keep in check yourself, or you'll be off the tracks. So
Yeah, it's like knowing the bumpers on the
yeah.
bowling alley. Yeah, got to get that strike. So,
Exactly.
so I'd love to take a step back and dive into the day of the layoff. I
Hmm.
think the emotions of the day, either like relief that some people feel or anxiety that others feel. What was that moment like? You said that they called you on the phone. How did the process look?
Yes, I received a text message on a Sunday evening, and the president or the CEO texted me and said that he wanted to talk to me before the week. And I turned to my husband and I said, "Well, here's the end."
A
And
text
so
on a
he
Sunday. Interesting.
yeah, so then he called me, and immediately following the text, I said, "Yes, you can call me." And
Hmm.
again, my gut was like, I knew what he was going to say. And he opened it up saying that they had to make drastic changes to the business because of COVID and the impact that it was having on the business. And that I was one of the permanent layoffs. And that was it. And so I said, okay. And, I had been there for 9.5 years and feel extraordinarily proud of what I did, what I was able to accomplish there, some of the biggest accomplishments in the history of the agency on the US side. And I can hold my head up high with those things. And, it's COVID. I mean, there's no need for me to to look at it personally. And, the relationship I built with my staff over the years, when he said it, I was just like, okay. When I got off the phone, I did ask, I'm a person that wants to learn from experiences. And so I did ask on the phone, was there any lesson in there for me? And he said, no. He said, this is, again, reiterated that it was COVID and this is what happened, needed to happen to keep the business going. And, That was it, really. I got off the phone, and I think I was a little numb at first because, you think it's coming and then it happens and then it sort of starts to settle in. And I was like, wow, okay. And it was more of thinking about, okay, well, I literally said, do I show up for work tomorrow? Like, what do I do? So then the next day was to speak with the president in the morning. And then there's so much that I've never been laid off before, thankfully. And so there's so much unknown there that I needed to figure out, like insurance and what do I do and how do I end things on a good note. And so that's really where my mind went immediately, which I think protected me from feeling really. I think I did break down a little later that evening. I videoed my sister and one of my nieces who I'm very close with. And I said it out loud. We were videoing and I shed a tear. And I think it's just like again, like that emotion of it, it's like, whoa, what just happened to me? And then frankly, the next 2 days I had a couple of crying moments. And then there was this thing where I was like, no more. Like, it doesn't get any more tears from me. It doesn't get that because that's where that like athlete fighter resiliency I tapped into. And I was like, I got to blaze my path. It is like my responsibility to map myself forward and to figure it out and to look at it as almost opportunity and journey and reimagine my path. And the time I spend bringing them and the past along with me, it actually only works against me. And I have a coach that I've worked with, Leslie Harris, who's tremendous and is a part of my Impact coalition of executive coaches, actually. And he has always encouraged me about thinking of it as a rearview mirror and like putting it in my rearview mirror. And then this additional thing of the past is only part of your reality if you bring it along with you. So I keep those things to help keep me in check. And so it's been 4 months and I probably had a couple of other days where I had some crying because it's so freaking hard, to be honest with you. It's not easy, to just like fight every day and pivot and keep yourself motivated. But that's what I literally, that is my choice. That is the choice that I the way that I want to present myself in the world and the way that I want to move forward.
I love it. Embracing the struggle. That's definitely the
Yeah.
way to go. And so now that walk us through, your sort of, I was calling it like bounce back, but then I got corrected the other day as like, that's not really the way to think about it. I was like, oh, whatever. But like, whatever, however you want to frame the moving past it, the moving on from it. What have the last 4 months been like? How have you been systematically taking back control and feeling productive and keeping yourself motivated?
That's a good way to think about it, is that like, and stand in your strength. This is another thing that I pull from that saying. And that's like my focus every day is really standing in my strength. And if I want, that's the way I want to, again, like approach the world, put myself forward in the world. So, I think it really came from one of the things that I absolutely had to do in the very beginning to get myself like just functional. Where was I going to get insurance from? Those type of things. And then it is just like talking to people nonstop. Again, it's that networking, but when I think of it as I'm just having a conversation and I bring value to every conversation. So that has me in a learning mode. So every call I have, everything I'm reading, I'm looking for the thing that I can extract, learn, share. If I meet someone, I'm thinking, oh, how can I be in a conversation and utilize this to provide value to that person? Because a lot of times people think, oh, networking, you talk to that person once and then you move on. Well, the reality is I've met so many people, expanded my network and learned so much during these 4 months that I'm sense of gratitude for it. But along the way, it's not just a one touch point. It's like, how do you have that touch point and start to cultivate a relationship with that person? And then, there's been many people that I have a conversation with, and then I think about it more, and then I follow up with them the next day or a week later. I'm like, gosh, I was thinking about this. And if it comes from an authentic, genuine place, it's just like, hey, I was thinking I could introduce you to this person, or I had an idea for you based on what you said, because I think that's why people get annoyed, like on LinkedIn and things like that, when they say like, you can't just meet me and then, try to sell something to me. It's because I think if we think of it as you still have to put in the effort to build a relationship with that person. So I think that's the thing that kind of like, that takes actions every day to do over time. And so to your question about what are my things that I'm doing every day and keeping me, moving forward, it's those things kind of just naturally provide conversation, follow up, conversation, thought, follow up, connection. And so that's the way I approach, my everyday.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it really is that sort of, listening for ways to help. And I think a networking conversation, it's an opener. It's not the
Yeah.
closer, right? And that's a big thing in the sales world, right? They're like, don't try and sell me on the first pitch. And so I think the way you're doing it is really great. And you mentioned a couple examples, like maybe introduce them to someone in your network, maybe,
Right.
give them a thought on an idea that came up. Do you have any specific examples? Something, because I think people hear that like, oh, bring value to the networking conversation. They're like, well,
Right.
I'm unemployed. What value could I bring? I'm just a burden on people. What is maybe a specific example of like value you've brought to someone in your network over? I mean, right now is a perfect example, but
Yes.
outside of this conversation, what's an example of how you've done that?
Yeah, good example. So I'm sure you know of Blue Wire podcast. I met a woman through her fiance who works there, and she's in business development. And I'm a little bit of a self-proclaimed nerd. I just like to learn about things and meet people. So I met her, Aunt Maggie, and I was just truly interested in what she was doing and asking her a bunch of questions. And I was listening to her and listening to like, she was sharing with me like a need she had, but I don't exactly know if she was thinking about it that way.
Mm,
She was just sharing with me the challenges that she'll face at times. And so, I had a really wonderful call with her and, a plan to stay connected. And then this happens to me a lot of times. I'll be like out riding my bike and I have these idea storms, I call them. And I got this idea that is bringing Blue Wire together with Open Sponsorship, which is an incredible platform of influencers that helps brands and athletes connect. And the founder, Ishveen, is so fantastic. And so I got this idea for how to bring the two together to add value to both sides. So I called Ishveen and I wrote her and I said, like, here's this idea. Are you open to it? And she was like, oh yeah, I think that's fantastic. So I wrote the two of them. I said, hey, this is just my idea for, you guys. And they both loved it. And we got on a phone call and then there's something in the mix now. So I'm not working for either one of them. Neither one of them are a client yet. But I do have a relationship with Open Sponsorship to help them in, with certain things like that. And to be able to find opportunities. But that is an example of neither one of them expected it, but it was extracted from conversation and knowing both parties and being able to bring something forward to them that they both felt was valuable. And there's a degree, I was thinking about it afterwards, there's a degree of that I met each of them during this time. They got to know me, they like me, and they've heard about the way that I work, but doing what I did actually then showed them in a different way. It allowed them to touch and feel almost and like see the way I operate, see the way my mind works. And I think that can help so that, they're not just going on like hearsay or, what I mean, positive hearsay, hopefully. And so I think that is an example of the way that I look to provide value in conversations. And I think there's something interesting about it. I think that sometimes people get surprised by it. They don't expect that. Like I'm coming to them as a new person asking transparently to network. And I think a lot of people think that just is going to be mean. I'm going to ask them for stuff all the time. I want you to immediately deliver something for me. So I think it's an interesting thing. I'll catch people sometimes almost like being caught off guard, which I don't know, can kind of be a fun thing.
I love it. And I also love how you phrased it. You're like, I don't work with them yet.
Yes.
Right? It's
Officially.
it's a dot, dot, dot. And I think that dot, dot, dot is a necessary thing to keep in mind when networking, because most people can't help us in the moment.
Right.
And being able to think, maybe I can help them first. And I like how you said
Mm-hmm.
show, don't tell. All
Mm.
sorts of people say in their resume bio or in their skills section, great communicator, connector, empathetic listener. They say all these things, and I sit there and I go, are you?
Really?
Like,
Yeah,
really? It's like when you meet
exactly.
someone, they're like, I'm just the nicest, it's like, maybe not. And I just love that, you don't have to say to them, oh, I'm someone who really brings value. I'm someone who connects people. I'm someone that helps businesses connect and expand because
Just do
you
it.
just connected them. And now they're like, holy cow, this person. And then they fill it with their words. And I think that that's like the
Yeah.
best way to do it. So bravo to you. And
Oh,
as we
thanks.
as we get towards, the close of the conversation here,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear, what are you seem to be filling your time very well, with productive things. Um,
Yes.
so what are you working on now, and what are you looking for in the moment
Mhm.
right now today?
Yep. Well, the last several days have been filled with, I designed my website over the weekend, which is an interesting thing because during this time it's all about actually gaining skill sets and continuing to learn and grow. So um, really it was like this more of a public launch of SLG Impact. And I'm the person who tries to not to your, with the conversation we were just having, not like, you know, shout about myself, but more like take the action and do. So a lot of these last months have been creating their relationships, getting momentum, working with different people, different entities, which are, listed on the projects page on the website. But, I think what I'm doing on a daily basis is, just taking all of those steps, so to launch. So the website, the LinkedIn announcement, those kind of things, that's very much filled the last several days. But a lot of it is working with my the woman, Elisa Padilla, who is an amazing marketer, who is serving in a consultant role right now while she's in a transition period. So a lot of it is just very proactively coming up with value propositions, whether it's a creative concept or we came up with the idea of workshops that we could pitch to people. And I was thinking about, brands, companies having a hard time right now making long-term commitments. And if you're a consultancy or anybody in an agency type sector, you're ideally, and I know we said scrap that word ideal, but would prefer to have longer engagements. But what we're facing right now is the need to create door openers, the need to create like kind of a opportunity for people to walk and before we're just running together. So we came with this idea of a workshop, and so we've been pitching that to people so that it's a short-term, highly actionable, very customized engagement. It can be 2 days, and someone walks away with solutions, because I think that what brands need right now are applicable quick turn solutions that they can actualize. So we've been pitching that to a lot of people. We also have short and long term engagements, but a lot of it is that outreach and to not doing outreach in a salesy way, but it really comes from a position of wanting to work, not wanting to be on the sidelines. I talked about being game ready every day, but I want to be in the game, So it's like, again, having those conversations, listening, talking with Elisa or, other people and coming up with solutions and not being afraid to go to someone. A lot of what I do is, like, I gave that example of the Blue Wire and open sponsorship idea. Like, I kind of had to put my ego to the side. I try to not bring ego to the play, actually, but it's just to be like, here's my idea. You might think it stinks, but it might spark a better idea. And so that's really how I'm filling my days, which is where my days are very full with these things. And then also, as I mentioned, I'm looking to add a couple of round out basically the consultant and coaching and things like that. So to truly be, the best we can be for people.
I love it. Oh, there's so much in there. And as we wrap up here,
Yeah.
who are you looking to connect with, and how can they get in touch with you?
I am looking to connect with, because SLG Impact is focused on maximizing positive impact for brands and people. So either people and brands who are looking to evolve themselves. And so, again, it's like whether you're looking for that touch point as a person and you need some coaching during this time, it's a resource available to you. And then, as far as like brands that are looking for solutions, and because, that don't want to be stuck in the mud or just focusing on, when I say mud, I mean like, the effect of COVID, and that they're not just going to look at, I'm either going to shut down or freeze or just let people go. It's the people who are looking for, how do I move myself forward? Where's the pivot? Where's the solution? So that's what I'm looking to have conversation with those people. And, again, it's not thinking that every call is going to turn into business. It's, let's start a conversation and then figure out how we could curate, something that could be impactful.
I love it. And should they reach out to you on LinkedIn, or should they hit you up?
Can hit me up on LinkedIn. And I also, as I said, I just launched the SLGimpact.com. Also have on Instagram, it is at SLG Impact. So any way you want to get at me, you can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shauna.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for stopping by this episode of the Career Therapy Podcast. It's been a pleasure having you. And if you're curious about what we do here at Career Therapy, head on over to www.careertherapy.com to see all of our coaching options, resources, and links to other things we got going on. If you would like to share your story on this podcast, something that you've gone through, a transition you've experienced in your career, whether it's getting a job after college, or going through a layoff, or getting back into the workforce after raising your family, we would love to hear from you. Head over to linkedin.com/in/Martin McGovern and shoot me a DM. Let me know what's going on, and I'd really like to share your story with the world. What we're trying to do here is really normalize the emotional side of the job search, because we all go through it. We all have tough times in our careers, and sharing these stories really helps people feel less alone and feel more empowered to take their career back into their own hands and make something of it. So thank you again for stopping by. If you'd like to leave a like or a comment, subscribe or share, or leave us a review on iTunes, and I think maybe even Spotify, we'd really appreciate it. Best of luck to you in all of your career endeavors, and I'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.